Massimo DeLuca had one rule. He never made life-changing decisions on the first meeting. Business deals waited. Wars waited. Marriage certainly waited. At 29, the head of the DeLuca syndicate had inherited one of the most powerful criminal business empires on the East Coast after his father's sudden death. Every newspaper called him ruthless. Every rival feared him. Every wealthy family wanted to be connected to him. Which explained why, on a chilly October afternoon, his armored convoy rolled through the iron gates of the Romano estate. The invitation had sounded innocent enough. Come meet my 4 daughters. If destiny favors us, perhaps one of them will become your wife. Massimo wasn't there to find love. He was there to honor a promise his father had made years earlier. As the convoy stopped before the mansion, his longtime security chief, Victor Marino, glanced toward the enormous house. Trying too hard, Victor muttered. Massimo followed his gaze. The mansion looked magnificent from a distance. Crystal fountains. Imported marble. Perfect hedges. But the details told another story. Paint was peeling beneath the balconies. The fountain pumps were making uneven noises. Several windows had recently been repaired with cheaper glass. Luxury on the surface. Financial desperation underneath. They're running out of money, Massimo said quietly. Victor smiled. You noticed too. I notice everything. Inside the mansion, chandeliers illuminated a drawing room filled with expensive furniture and carefully arranged flowers. Antonio Romano hurried forward wearing the smile of a man trying very hard to appear confident. Massimo. Welcome. It's an honor. Massimo shook his hand politely. Thank you for inviting me. Antonio clapped his hands. My daughters have been waiting all afternoon. A pair of double doors opened. 4 women entered together. Each one beautiful. Each one dressed as though the evening had been planned for months. The eldest, Adriana, wore an emerald gown and introduced herself with flawless confidence. I oversee our family's charitable foundation. The second, Bianca, immediately began discussing European fashion shows. The third, Valentina, laughed constantly even before jokes were told. The youngest, Serena, never stopped checking whether her hair was perfectly in place. Massimo listened politely. But something bothered him. Every answer sounded rehearsed. Every smile looked practiced. Every compliment felt calculated. Victor leaned closer. They've memorized every detail about you. Massimo gave the slightest nod. I noticed. Antonio beamed proudly. My girls have many talents. Before anyone could continue, he called toward the hallway. Tea. A quiet voice answered. Right away, sir. Moments later, a woman entered pushing a simple wooden tea cart. She didn't look anything like the 4 sisters. She was noticeably overweight, dressed in a plain gray cardigan over a navy dress that had clearly been mended more than once. Her dark hair was tied into a loose braid. No expensive jewelry. No makeup. No perfume. She kept her eyes lowered as she poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. The sisters ignored her completely. One of them even moved her chair without saying thank you, forcing the woman to adjust the tea cart. She did so without complaint. Massimo watched silently. People often revealed their character by how they treated those they believed didn't matter. So far, only one person in the room seemed genuine. As she approached him with the tray, her eyes briefly lifted. Not toward his face, toward his right hand. Massimo instinctively curled his fingers. For almost a year, a nerve injury from an old knife fight had caused occasional tremors in that hand. Specialists had prescribed medication, injections, even surgery. Nothing had worked. The woman quietly frowned. Without anyone noticing, she returned one teacup to the cart and replaced it with another. Victor caught the movement. So, he whispered. You saw that too? Massimo nodded almost imperceptibly. He accepted the cup. The aroma surprised him. It wasn't ordinary Earl Grey. There was fresh ginger, cinnamon, lemon peel, and another scent he couldn't identify. He took a careful sip. Warmth spread slowly through his arm. Within seconds, the familiar ache in his wrist began fading. He slowly opened and closed his fingers. No stiffness, no tremor. For the first time in months, his hand felt completely steady. Across the room, Victor's eyes widened. He had witnessed hundreds of doctors fail. Yet one cup of tea had accomplished what none of them could. Adriana smiled sweetly. So, Massimo, what qualities do you admire most in a future wife? Massimo never answered. Instead, he slowly placed the teacup onto the table. Then looked directly at the quiet woman beside the tea cart. The room fell silent. What, he asked calmly, is your name?" The woman hesitated, then answered softly, "Elena, sir." Massimo held her gaze for a long moment, then pointed toward the empty chair across from him. "Elena, I'd like you to sit with me." The porcelain cup slipped from Antonio Romano's trembling hand and shattered across the marble floor. The sharp sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the drawing room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Antonio Romano stared at Massimo as though the young Mafia boss had spoken another language. "I'm sorry?" Antonio finally managed. Massimo's expression never changed. "You heard me." He looked at Elena again. "The chair is for you." Elena instinctively stepped backward. "I couldn't possibly." "You can," Massimo interrupted gently. "Please." Her eyes shifted toward Antonio, silently asking permission. For 11 years she had never sat in this room while guests were present. She served. She cleaned. She disappeared. Antonio forced an awkward laugh. "Massimo, Elena is just helping with the tea. I know exactly what she's doing." Massimo's calm voice carried through the room. "And she's the only person here who noticed something no one else did." Victor folded his arms, watching everyone's reactions. The four sisters exchanged confused glances. Bianca finally broke the silence. What exactly did she notice? Massimo lifted his right hand. "My injury." The sisters looked puzzled. Antonio frowned. "Injury?" Massimo slowly opened and closed his fingers. "For almost a year, nerve damage has caused constant pain and tremors. I've consulted specialists in New York, Boston, and Zurich. They prescribed medications, physical therapy, surgery. Nothing worked." He picked up the teacup again. "But before serving me, Elena changed my tea." Everyone turned toward her. She looked embarrassed by the sudden attention. "I only thought it might help." Massimo looked directly at her. "What did you put in it?" She hesitated. "It isn't a secret. Fresh ginger, cinnamon, lemon peel, a small amount of white willow bark, and magnesium. It helps relax inflamed muscles." Victor's eyebrows lifted. "You know herbal medicine?" "I read." "What kind of books?" "Medical journals, old herbal texts, pharmacology books from the public library." Massimo studied her carefully. "You've had formal training?" She smiled faintly. "No. I couldn't afford university, so I taught myself." The room became silent again. Adriana suddenly laughed. "It sounds impressive. But she's always reading strange books." Bianca added, "She fills notebooks with recipes and medical notes." Serena rolled her eyes. "Father says she spends too much time studying." Antonio smiled nervously. "It's just a hobby." Massimo slowly looked around the room. "A hobby?" He turned back toward Elena. "Who manages this estate?" Antonio answered immediately. "I do." Massimo ignored him. "I'm asking Elena." She looked uncomfortable. "I mostly help." "Help with what?" She quietly counted on her fingers. "The household accounts, the staff schedules, the kitchen, the gardens, the inventory, the suppliers, the monthly budget, the maintenance requests." Victor looked around the massive mansion. "That's almost everything." Elena nodded modestly. "There aren't many staff anymore. So everyone helps." Massimo noticed the wording. "Everyone helps. Not I do everything." She refused to take credit. That told him even more about her character. Antonio quickly stepped forward. "Massimo, perhaps we should continue getting to know my daughters." Adriana studied in Paris. Bianca speaks 4 languages. Serena. Massimo raised one hand. Antonio stopped talking immediately. "I've already learned the most important thing today." The older man's smile faded. "And what is that?" Massimo looked at the 4 sisters. They all spoke about themselves. Then he looked at Elena. She paid attention to someone else. Silence. Bianca crossed her arms. "So because she made tea, you're impressed?" "No." Massimo's voice remained calm. "I'm impressed because she observed. Observation can't be taught. It comes from caring." Elena lowered her eyes. Nobody had ever complimented her mind before. Not once. Massimo stood. The room instinctively became quieter. He walked slowly toward the large window overlooking the gardens. Without turning around he asked, "Elena." "Yes, sir?" "If someone offered you a new life, would you take it?" She froze. No one had ever asked her that question. Not even she had allowed herself to imagine the answer. After several long seconds she whispered, "I don't know." Massimo turned. "Why not?" She smiled sadly. "Because I've spent so many years making this house work. I forgot to imagine another one." Even Victor felt something tighten in his chest. The answer wasn't dramatic. It was honest. Massimo walked back toward her. "What if the new life wasn't charity?" She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I don't offer pity. I offer opportunity." He paused. "I need intelligent people beside me. People who notice details. People who solve problems. So." He looked directly into her eyes. "I'm offering you a position in my organization." Antonio's face turned white. "Massimo. This is absurd. You came here to choose a bride." Massimo nodded once. "I did." The room became completely still. His next sentence landed like thunder. "And I've made my choice." The sisters stared at him. Antonio stopped breathing. Even Elena looked shocked. Massimo continued calmly. "I have no interest in marrying beauty without substance. I want loyalty, kindness, intelligence, humility. The woman standing beside that tea cart has shown me all four in less than an hour." He stepped closer to Elena. "If you're willing, I'd like you to leave this estate with me today." Tears immediately gathered in Elena's eyes. Not because she had been chosen, but because, for the first time in 11 years, someone had looked beyond her appearance and seen the extraordinary woman she had quietly become. No one in the Romano mansion spoke. Even the crackling fire in the marble fireplace seemed louder than the silence. Elena stood frozen beside the tea cart, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. DeLuca?" she whispered. "I don't know what to say." Massimo looked at her calmly. "You don't have to answer immediately. I'm giving you a choice." Antonio Romano suddenly stepped between them. "Massimo, please." His smile had disappeared completely. "This is moving far too quickly. Elena isn't prepared for your world. She spent her entire life inside this house." Massimo folded his hands behind his back. "And whose fault is that?" Antonio opened his mouth, then quietly closed it again. For the first time all evening he had no answer. Elena finally gathered enough courage to speak. "If I leave, who will manage everything here?" Bianca laughed. "As if no one else can make tea." Elena didn't respond. Massimo did. "I don't think she's worried about the tea." He looked around the mansion. "She's worried because she's the one holding this house together." Antonio shifted uncomfortably. Victor noticed. "So she really does run everything," he said. Antonio sighed heavily. "More than I'd like to admit." The confession stunned his daughters. Adriana frowned. "Father, you never told us that." Antonio rubbed his forehead. "Because none of you ever asked." Silence filled the room again. Massimo looked toward Elena. "You've spent years solving everyone else's problems. What would you do if someone finally gave you the chance to solve your own?" Before she could answer, Victor's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed instantly. "Boss." Massimo looked over. "What is it?" "It's headquarters. Urgent." Massimo accepted the phone. "This is DeLuca." A worried voice answered immediately. "Sir, we've got a serious problem." Massimo's expression hardened. "Talk." "Our largest pharmaceutical shipment is being held at the port of Newark. The customs authority rejected the documentation. If it isn't cleared within 6 hours, we lose every hospital contract." Massimo frowned. "How much?" "Just under $23 million. The room became silent again. Victor immediately opened his tablet. "I'll contact legal. We already tried. The paperwork is correct. Customs insists one declaration code is missing." Massimo thought for several seconds. Nothing came. Then, a quiet voice interrupted. "May I see the documents?" Everyone looked toward Elena. Victor hesitated. Massimo didn't. He handed her the tablet. She sat carefully on the edge of a chair and began reading. Her eyes moved quickly across shipping forms, import licenses, container manifests, commodity declarations. Nobody spoke. After 3 minutes, she looked up. "The paperwork isn't wrong." Victor blinked. "What?" "It's incomplete." She pointed toward the screen. "This shipment contains medical-grade botanical extracts." Victor nodded. "Correct. You filed them under pharmaceutical imports. That's standard." "It used to be." She scrolled farther down. 3 months ago the Federal Customs Authority changed the classification. They now require botanical compounds to be declared separately. The declaration code isn't missing. It's outdated. Victor stared at her. How do you know that? I read the customs bulletin online last month. Antonio's jaw dropped. You read customs regulations? She looked almost embarrassed. I was curious. Victor immediately called headquarters. Update every declaration. He waited. 30 seconds later his eyes widened. They're accepting it. Massimo looked at Elena. The shipment's moving. Victor slowly lowered the phone. The containers are already being released. The room exploded with disbelief. $23 million. Saved in less than 5 minutes. By a woman everyone had ignored. Massimo smiled. Not because of the money. Because his instincts had been right. He walked toward Elena. You've just solved your first problem for my organization. She looked confused. But I don't work for you. You do if you accept. Antonio slowly sat down. He suddenly understood exactly what he was about to lose. Not a servant. Not a housekeeper. The mind that had quietly kept his family's life from collapsing. Bianca finally snapped. This is unbelievable. She's not some business genius. She's just lucky. Elena gently shook her head. No. I've simply spent years reading things nobody else thought were important. Massimo looked at Victor. When we return to New York, I want a complete office prepared. Victor nodded. For Elena? For Director Elena. The title stunned everyone. Even Elena. Director? Massimo smiled. You've earned it. Tears filled Elena's eyes again. No one had ever promoted her. No one had ever believed in her. She had spent years making herself invisible because it hurt less than hoping. Now, someone had looked at her and seen everything she had tried so hard to hide. She slowly met Massimo's eyes. I'll come with you. A warm smile crossed his face. Good. He extended his hand. She hesitated for only a second before placing hers in his. At that exact moment, the lights inside the mansion suddenly went out. The room fell into complete darkness. A gunshot echoed from somewhere outside. Victor instantly pulled his pistol. Boss. This wasn't a power failure. We're under attack. The mansion plunged into darkness. Someone screamed. A second later, another gunshot shattered the silence. The crystal chandelier above the drawing room exploded, sending glass raining across the marble floor. Victor reacted instantly. Protect the boss. Within seconds, DeLuca's security team formed a shield around Massimo. Pistols were drawn. Flashlights flickered on. Antonio Romano stumbled backward, panic replacing the confidence he'd worn all afternoon. My daughters, he shouted. Where are my daughters? The 4 sisters huddled together behind a sofa, crying and calling each other's names. Only one person wasn't screaming. Elena. Massimo noticed her standing perfectly still near the tea cart, listening instead of panicking. Her eyes weren't searching for the attackers. They were searching for something else. The shots. She whispered. Victor glanced toward her. What about them? They're too far apart. Victor frowned. What? The first shot came from the front gate. The second. She tilted her head slightly. Came from the east garden. Massimo immediately understood. 2 shooters. Victor's expression hardened. She's right. He spoke into his radio. Team Alpha, cover the front entrance. Bravo team, move to the east garden. Now. Several guards rushed into the darkness. Moments later, a burst of gunfire echoed outside. Then shouting. Then silence. The mansion lights suddenly flickered back on. Emergency generators had activated. Everyone looked toward the large front windows. Victor's radio crackled. East garden secured. 1 suspect captured. The second escaped through the vineyard. Massimo slowly lowered his weapon. Nobody inside the room had been injured. He turned toward Elena. You recognized their positions from 2 gunshots. She looked almost embarrassed. I've always had good hearing. Victor shook his head. No. That's more than good hearing. You mapped 2 firing positions in complete darkness. Massimo smiled slightly. Another detail everyone else missed. Antonio collapsed into a nearby chair, breathing heavily. I don't understand. Who would attack my house? Victor answered bluntly. They weren't attacking your house. Everyone looked at him. They were attacking Massimo. Silence. Massimo nodded. My rivals knew I was coming here today. Antonio's face became pale again. They followed you. Apparently. Just then another guard hurried inside carrying a black backpack. "We found this near the east wall." Victor carefully opened it. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Not of Massimo. Not of the Romano estate. Every single photograph showed Elena. Working in the garden. Reading books near the kitchen window. Shopping in town. Serving guests. The oldest photograph looked nearly 3 years old. Elena stared in disbelief. "They've been watching me?" Massimo took one of the pictures. Someone had circled Elena with red ink. Across the bottom, a sentence had been written. "Find the woman before DeLuca does." Victor read it twice, then looked at Massimo. This wasn't today's decision. They've been tracking her for years. Antonio looked utterly confused. But why? No one even knows her. Massimo slowly folded the photograph. "Someone does." He turned toward Elena. "Is there anything you've never told anyone?" She looked frightened. "I don't think so." "Think carefully." She closed her eyes for several seconds. Then suddenly, "I remember something." Everyone became quiet. "When I was 15. My mother gave me a small notebook. I asked what it was. She told me never to lose it." Victor immediately asked, "Where is it now?" Elena's eyes widened. "My room. I hid it beneath a loose floorboard. I haven't looked at it in years." Massimo didn't hesitate. "We're getting it." Antonio stood quickly. "I'll take you." "No." Victor stopped him. "My team goes first." Within minutes, 2 guards searched Elena's tiny attic bedroom. They returned carrying an old leather notebook wrapped in faded cloth. Elena carefully accepted it. The cover was cracked with age. Inside were handwritten notes. Recipes. Plant sketches. Medical observations. Then, near the center, Massimo noticed something different. A folded document. Yellow with age. Stamped with an unfamiliar crest. Victor unfolded it carefully. His eyes narrowed. "This isn't a recipe." "What is it?" Massimo asked. Victor looked stunned. "It's a patent. A pharmaceutical patent. Dated 24 years earlier." The inventor's name made Elena stop breathing. "Dr. Emilia Rossi." "My mother." Elena whispered. Victor continued reading. "This formula was never registered publicly." Massimo frowned. "What does it do?" Victor looked back at the document. "If this is authentic, it's worth hundreds of millions." The room became silent once more. Suddenly everything made sense. The surveillance. The photographs. The attack. The mysterious interest in Elena. Someone hadn't been searching for a housekeeper. They had been searching for the only surviving heir to a medical breakthrough. Massimo gently closed the notebook and handed it back to Elena. "You were never ordinary." She looked at the worn pages with tears filling her eyes. "My mother. She knew." Massimo nodded. "And she protected it." He looked toward Victor. "Double the security. No one leaves this house until sunrise." Victor nodded immediately. "It'll be done." Massimo turned back to Elena. For the first time that evening, he didn't see an overlooked woman. He saw someone who had unknowingly inherited a legacy powerful enough to start a war. And he silently made himself one promise. No matter who came after her, no one would ever make her invisible again. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the broken windows of the Romano mansion. Nobody had slept. Victor's men had searched every inch of the estate before dawn. The captured gunman had revealed almost nothing. He admitted only one thing. Someone had offered $10 million for the old leather notebook. Nothing else. Massimo stood near the fireplace, watching Elena carefully wrap the notebook back in its faded cloth. She looked overwhelmed. Not because it was valuable. Because every page had been written by the mother she barely remembered. "I thought." Elena whispered, "She only loved plants." Massimo smiled gently. "She did." Victor stepped closer. "But she also changed modern medicine." He handed Massimo a tablet displaying an old newspaper article. The headline read, "Brilliant researcher disappears before pharmaceutical breakthrough." Below the headline was a faded photograph. A young woman smiled confidently at the camera. Elena gasped. "My mother." Victor nodded. "Dr. Emilia Rossi. One of the leading botanical researchers of her generation. The patent disappeared the same week she did." Antonio slowly lowered his head. "I had no idea." Elena looked at him. "You never asked." The words weren't cruel. They were simply true. Antonio closed his eyes. For years he had believed he had rescued an unfortunate girl. He had never realized the extraordinary woman living under his roof. Massimo walked toward Elena. "What do you want to do?" She looked down at the notebook. "I don't want people fighting over it. I don't want anyone dying because of it." Massimo nodded. "Then they won't." He turned toward Victor. "Arrange a meeting with the National Medical Research Foundation." Victor understood immediately. "You want to donate the patent? If it belongs to anyone." Massimo looked back at Elena. "It belongs to the people whose lives it can save." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "My mother would have wanted that." Victor smiled. "I think so too." Antonio slowly approached Elena. For the first time in 11 years. He looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry." The room became silent. "I gave you a roof. But I never gave you the respect you deserved. I kept telling myself I was helping you. When the truth is, you were helping us." His voice trembled. "You held this family together." Elena smiled softly. "I know you never meant to hurt me." Antonio shook his head. "Intentions don't erase years." He lowered his head. "I hope someday you'll forgive me." Elena stepped forward. She hugged him. "Only briefly." "I already have." Behind them, Bianca, Adriana, Valentina, and Serena watched quietly. None of them spoke. For the first time in their lives, they realized they had mistaken kindness for weakness, intelligence for simplicity, and silence for insignificance. Massimo checked his watch. "We should leave." Elena nodded. This time, she wasn't walking away as a forgotten housekeeper. She was leaving as the daughter of a brilliant scientist, a woman whose knowledge had already saved millions. Outside, the DeLuca convoy waited beneath the bright autumn sky. Before getting into the SUV, Elena looked back one final time. Not with bitterness. Not with regret. Only gratitude. She had entered that house as a frightened 16-year-old girl. She was leaving as someone who finally knew her worth. As the convoy drove toward New York, silence filled the vehicle. Massimo glanced toward Elena. "What are you thinking?" She smiled. "For years, I believed my life would always stay inside one kitchen." She looked out the window. "Funny how one cup of tea changed everything." Massimo laughed quietly. "It wasn't the tea." She looked at him. "It was you. You simply reminded everyone of what was already there." Elena lowered her eyes. "No one had ever believed in me before." "I did." "You barely knew me." Massimo smiled. "I knew enough. You noticed pain nobody else saw. You solved problems nobody else understood. And when everyone else looked at your appearance, I looked at your character." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally, Massimo reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He removed a small velvet box. Victor smiled to himself. He had been wondering how long his boss would wait. Massimo opened the box. Inside was a simple platinum ring. No oversized diamond. No extravagant design. Just elegance. He turned toward Elena. "I wasn't looking for the most beautiful woman in that mansion. I was looking for the strongest heart." He took a slow breath. "I found it." Elena's eyes widened. "Massimo, I know this is sooner than either of us expected. But life has taught me something. When you find someone genuine, don't wait for tomorrow." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks. Not because a powerful man had proposed, but because, for the first time in her entire life, someone had chosen her. Not out of obligation. Not out of pity. Not because she fit the world's definition of beauty, but because he saw her mind, her kindness, her courage, her heart. She nodded through happy tears. "Yes." Massimo gently slipped the ring onto her finger. Victor cleared his throat dramatically. "So, does this mean I finally get to stop calling her Miss Elena?" Everyone laughed. Even Elena. 6 months later, the wedding was held in a quiet lakeside chapel instead of a lavish ballroom. The pharmaceutical patent was donated to the National Medical Research Foundation, ensuring affordable treatments could be developed in Dr. Emilia Rossi's name. Elena became Director of Innovation at the DeLuca Foundation, helping hospitals and researchers improve botanical medicines around the world. Antonio attended every family gathering after that, not as a man hiding his mistakes, but as one trying to make up for them. His daughters changed too. They stopped measuring people by appearance and started paying attention to character. And whenever reporters asked Massimo why one of the richest and most feared men in America had chosen an overweight woman who had once served tea in silence, he always gave the same answer. "I didn't choose the woman everyone noticed. I chose the woman everyone overlooked." Because the greatest treasures in life are rarely the ones shouting to be seen.